I have now completed a review of every film in the 2001 series that ever was and likely ever will be, and I wanted to take a moment to address a few issues mainly regarding my review of 2001, as well as to talk about a few issues that have been raised since the release of that review. There were a lot of complaints about my review, obviously, but one of the most common complaints was that I didn't talk at all about what Stanley Kubrick was trying to do with his film. The basic complaint runs something like this. You've given mention to what filmmakers in different genres were going for in the past and instructed viewers to keep this in mind, and you won't even definitively say anything about the Twilight series because of what those movies are trying to do, as well as what their target demographic is, yet you couldn't be bothered to say one thing about Kubrick's motivations in making 2001. This is a fair point. In my review of Independence Day, for example, I did caution the audience that the standards of a film like this must be adjusted accordingly so as not to confuse the caliber of that film with something like Star Wars, and I'm sure other examples can be found in my reviews as well. It was not my intention to skirt this issue in my 2001 review, but so much has already been said and documented regarding speculation over Kubrick's motivations that I didn't feel it necessary to reiterate them in the review. In retrospect, that was probably a mistake, and so I hope this Afterward will be sufficient in making up for any wrongdoing that might have taken place. So what was Stanley Kubrick trying to do? I don't claim to have access to the man's mind or his motivations, and so I've turned to one of the people who knew him best in order to answer this question. Steven Spielberg was a close friend of Kubrick's, and the two had a very open communication during both of their careers. Shortly after Kubrick's death, Steven was interviewed on his memories and thoughts of the man's career and of their friendship. In this interview is an indispensable insight into what Kubrick's motivations were, not just regarding 2001, but on virtually the man's entire writing career. Spielberg begins in the same place I did in my review, discussing Stanley Kubrick, the director. Now, when watching this part of the interview, note how easy it is to give him credit in that field. There is so much to say on that issue that the specifics involving his praise cannot come fast enough.
When you look at all of his films, even though they all have one thing in common, for me anyway, the craft is impeccable. Every film he's ever made, the craft is impeccable. The lighting, the dolly shots, the crane moves, the zoom-ins on Barry Lyndon, the framing, the lighting, the hot windows as backlight. You know, there's the compositions. I mean, the exact compositions. You had to hit your mark precisely to please Stanley so he'd get his painting, the painting he was putting on canvas for you to appreciate. It had to be perfect. His choice of lenses, his Steadicam work in latter year films, impeccable, the best in history. Nobody could shoot a movie better than Stanley Kubrick in history.
As I said in my review, I agree with everything Steven just said. I've even taken a lot of heat for that statement. What about Orson Welles, people ask me? Well, Welles is definitely up there, but here's the difference for me. I think that since the days of Orson Welles, modern directors have caught up with him. I've seen movies today that look just as good, if not better, than some of Welles' later year works. But even the most recent films I have seen don't look anywhere near as good as Kubrick's earliest work. But after assessing Stanley Kubrick, the director, Steven then moves on to Kubrick, the writer. And note how the specifics totally disappear in assessing that part of his career.
That was impeccable, but the way he told stories was sometimes antithetical to the way we are accustomed to receiving stories. And I think sometimes Stanley just did that because he didn't want to be like everybody else, and he had a very specific way of telling a story. It's not that he wanted to show off, I'm so different than you. But he said, why does every story have to be told the same way? He would tell me the last couple of years of his life when we were talking about the form. He kept saying, I want to change the form. I want to make a movie that changes the form. And I said, well, didn't you do that with 2001? He said, just a little bit, but not enough. I really want to change the form. So he kept looking for different ways to tell stories.
It's important for me to stress here that I have no problem with Kubrick's motivation of trying to change the form. In fact, I think it was a grand and lofty ideal for him to try and do something like that. Trying to change the form is a terrific motivation, and it isn't something that I would ever look down upon. I've said a lot of negative things about his approach, and I stand by them, but this motivation isn't something I could ever object to. Changing the form is what art and innovation is all about. I'm not going to suggest that we should have stuck with radio programs rather than switching over to television. I'm not going to sit here and say that Led Zeppelin should have focused simply on keeping time rather than playing their asses off. For all of my protestations of the rules and guidelines of art, I do understand that those rules and guidelines must be challenged from time to time by artistic visionaries, otherwise there would be no innovation. My problem with Stanley Kubrick is that he changed the form so much that it isn't even recognizable as that form anymore. And this is magnificently illustrated by Spielberg comparing Kubrick's work to a painting. 2001 in particular is far closer to that of a painting than it ever was a film. I must also respectfully disagree with Spielberg on one of his statements. Kubrick's approach to storytelling is not just antithetical to the way we are accustomed to receiving stories. It is antithetical to storytelling, period. Now, as for 2001 being more akin to a painting, some may be justified in asking, well, what's wrong with that? Let me explain. Imagine if I walk through an art gallery and look at some of the finest paintings ever created. I stand there and say, you know, I'm sick of paintings being painted the same way. I really want to change the form. So here's what I do. I grab a video camera and wait for nightfall. Then I shoot a beautiful scene of the night sky, with stars more brilliant than you have ever seen in your life, right up until the sun comes up over the horizon. I then take that footage to an art gallery and project it onto a canvas. People stand in awe over the beautiful footage I've shot and declare my work to be one of the greatest and most innovative paintings ever constructed, right up there with Van Gogh and Picasso. Would this praise be justified? Absolutely not. Why? Because no matter how beautiful the scenery I shot is, it does not change the fact that I didn't actually paint anything. My work is far closer to a movie than it is a painting. So too with Kubrick. However great and innovative the special effects were in his film, this does not change the fact that he didn't actually write a story. A final quick note about this analogy. Viewers will likely be quick to point out an obvious flaw in it. I'm saying that video being shot in place of a painting makes it more like a movie, but I'm also saying that video being shot in 2001 makes it less like a movie. Well, keep in mind that this analogy only pertains to painting versus storytelling. It doesn't count as a painting if you don't paint, and likewise, it doesn't count as a film if you don't write. Now let's talk about the writing. Many people who have objected to my review have told me something to the following effect. The film is written well, it just isn't written traditionally. It isn't supposed to have a beginning-to-end story that wraps itself up in the end. It is supposed to open your mind to the speculation about man's place in the universe, God and godlessness, and other such things. It raises questions about existence, the answers of which are left to the audience. To which I respond thusly.
The reason people aren't having conversations is because we haven't given them a conversation piece.
Well, what did you have in mind, sir?
Wrap your brain around this.
Very provocative, sir.
Pretty hard not to have an opinion about this.
It's as if God exists, because there's the word God. But then you see the question mark, and you wonder, does he?
Raising questions about anything using nothing more than passive imagery is not hard, and it doesn't require any writing talent. Writing a story with characters and so on that make you think about similar issues is hard and praiseworthy when a writer gets it right. But placing images on screen that make us think about certain things could be done by anyone who has access to music and stock footage, and certainly isn't worth anyone's praise, let alone their time. If all Stanley Kubrick was trying to do in 2001 was use images to make us think about certain questions, then he could have saved himself a lot of time, trouble, and energy by simply writing God ? And sticking it on a water cooler. Now, the second most common objection to my review is somewhat similar to the first. The film doesn't have a story, but that doesn't mean it isn't good. It's simply abstract. It just has images that make you think. Sure, they don't connect to any story, but they open your mind and raise your awareness. It's all about the effect the images have on your subconscious. To which I respond thusly.
The following is Trevor Wolf's first, and I certainly hope not only, campaign commercial for the mayor's Senate run. Oh, I should say that Trevor had complete creative control on this, so what you're about to see is a window into his talented mind.
Cat got your tongue. Paid for by the Randall Winston for Senate campaign.
What you have just witnessed is just as good as 2001. And before you start scoffing at me and saying, no it isn't, let me demonstrate why that is. For the remainder of this explanation, put aside all your feelings, good or bad, on this issue, and just honestly answer me this one question. What is the difference between 2001 and this? They both resort to images rather than an actual story. They both have a subliminal subconscious meaning known only to the person who created it, and everyone else just has to kind of figure out what it is. These are the reasons 2001 is said to be good. If you are going to give 2001 a pass for these reasons, you must give this a pass as well. Now let's give this the exact same get out of jail free cards that 2001 gets. It isn't supposed to have a story. It isn't supposed to have a plot. It's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to make you ponder the images. If you don't know what a suspended umbrella, a clown swinging from the ceiling, soldiers with plungers in their guns, a bride on a motor scooter, and a cat have to do with the mayor's Senate run, you just don't get it. You just aren't sophisticated enough. You just aren't thinking about it enough. Only when you realize that this is brilliant will you have finally gotten the film. There. Now this is just as good as 2001. Why didn't this get a Best Screenplay nomination? Chuck Sonnenberg once said that good art should always make you think. And he's right. Chuck Sonnenberg does not necessarily and probably doesn't agree with Confused Matthew's review of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But I would expand on that statement to say that good art should always make you think well, not just period. Take, for example, a passage from the review by Samuel Delaney. The images and objects are presented with superb visual intelligence. They are exciting to look at, and they are exciting to think about after you've looked at them. Are we actually saying here that just making people's minds wander about an image is good? That's the exact opposite of good thinking. That's like telling a boxer to just go out there and throw as many punches as he possibly can. Sure, he's throwing a lot of punches, but how many of them are actually being effective? On second thought, I don't really like that boxer very much. There we go, that's better. For me, the best test for a good story in a film is whether or not you could play the movie a second time with the sound off and still be able to describe a detailed story. This is why it confuses me when people ask if I feel the same of Fantasia as I do of 2001. I could turn the sound off in Fantasia and describe a story to you. The music simply adds to the ambience of that story. Fantasia wasn't just making statements with its images. It used them to tell a handful of real stories. And you could do this with virtually any other movie in history. Sure, you may run into parts where there is nothing to say beyond the repetition of the scene. Marty is driving, hobbits are walking, Kirk fights Khan, Batman chases Joker, T-Rex chases car. But how much of these passive scenes would be overshadowed by the film's story? Tremendously with regard to all these examples, and the absolute reverse is true of 2001. Stanley Kubrick did indeed change the form with regard to 2001, but he did more than that. He mutilated the form. Virtually no other writer has taken Kubrick's approach to storytelling, and this is absolutely for the better. Plenty of good has come of Kubrick's influence with regard to the way directors direct, but no influential impact resulted in the way writers write. Thank God. I think I've now covered everything I can on how I feel about Kubrick's writing style, or lack thereof. Most people likely still disagree with me on this issue, but I at least thank you all for entertaining the thought. The end.